All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. If you want to find a spot, we'll get rolling with our class this evening. Appreciate everybody being here and hope that you are having a good week. It sounds like tomorrow could be fun, so if you have to get out, good luck. But with all of that being said, we're in Matthew. Again, we'll be in Matthew for probably, I think, the next 3 weeks. Kind of taking a little more time with this, and so you may have noticed in the schedule for this week there was a day of reflection, so it's kind of read whatever you want to read. We read a little bit of Proverbs, or you can reread or catch up or whatever, and then we reread a few things as well. So we're going to just be digging in. Instead of 7 chapters, we're only going to be digging into chapters 8, 9, 10, and 11 tonight, and so we'll be able to get a little more in depth than we will in some other places. But with all of that being said, we're going to spend some time starting off in chapter 8 and 9, if you want to turn over there. And I want to highlight something as we get started that Zach brought up in his video last Wednesday on authority. That's a pretty significant thought for not only the very end of chapter 7, but for the chapters 8 and 9 as well. And so I want to read the very end of chapter 7, and it says at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. And we talked a little bit last week about, some of the things that might mean, but I wanted to ask, when you think about the word authority, what goes along with that? When you think about someone who is an authority on something or someone who is in a position of authority, what does that tend to mean for the rest of us, for the other people not in authority? What's the significance of authority? Jim? Okay, so there is an aspect of an authority is over, right? And whatever they say or direct, we're, called to do in some regard. What other things do we associate with that word authority? Mike? Okay, right, there's a source with it, right? And again, we could spend a long time talking about all the different, areas where people have authority. And you think about in work or in the government or in family, right? There's all of those areas. There's someone that's in a position of authority for a specific reason or a purpose as well. Rudy?
That person has knowledge.
Okay. So when we think about someone who is an authority on a specific subject, then we would say, okay, they're worth listening to, right? They know what they're talking about. And we could probably pick something that all of us might feel like, well, I'm not an authority on a lot, but I could say I'm an authority on this subject, right? And we could feel confident in speaking about it, and someone else might feel comfortable then listening to us about it. And so, when you think about authority and all of the things that go along with that, one of the significant aspects of authority is that we're called to listen to it, right? If we recognize an authority, then we listen to that authority. And Matthew has just recorded for us the response of the crowd at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, which was Jesus spoke as one who had an authority that no one else had. And so it makes a lot of sense then when you read chapters 8 and 9, this is kind of what Zach brought up, that Matthew's going to reinforce that authority, right? And so if you're Matthew and you're writing your gospel and you're going to tell people that Jesus had authority, what then are you going to have to do after that point? This kind of goes to what you brought up, Mike. I mean, what's the next thing? If you're going to tell people that someone has authority, what do you have to do at that point?
Show me the money.
Okay, show me how, right? Show me what it is that gives this person authority. And that's what these chapters ultimately do. When you look at chapters 8 and 9, there's not a lot of teaching. There's pockets of it, but it's mainly actions taken by Jesus. And these are actions that demonstrate authority. And so just for time's sake tonight, we're not going to read all of them, but I want to just draw your attention as you look at the headings. I'm just going to read the headings with you. So starting in chapter 8, you've got Jesus cleanses a leper. You've got, my heading's the faith of the centurion, but it's ultimately the healing that takes place of this centurion's servant. You've got Jesus healing many. You've got the cost of following Jesus. Jesus calming the storm, healing 2 men with demons. He heals a paralytic, calls Matthew, discusses fasting, raises a girl back to life, heals a woman with a bleeding problem, heals 2 blind men, heals a man who has a demon that's not allowing him to speak, right? You've got all of these different things happening. And so when you look at the idea of Jesus has authority, in what ways does Matthew reinforce that message? What does he show us in these texts? What ways does Jesus have authority? Mike? Right, and so what's the significance of the scope of that? Yeah, it's everything, right? It's not just Jesus, because again, we could think about if Jesus had the power to do miracles alone, right? Just to do healing, well, that would be obviously very unique, but that wouldn't make him God, and it wouldn't necessarily make him the Messiah, right? There's got to be more to it than that. And so you've got this broad scope of things where, as Mike brought up, you've got disease, right? You've got a man with leprosy that's healed, a man that's paralyzed that's healed, a woman with a bleeding issue that's healed, blind men that are healed. All of these things showing that Jesus has authority over disease, right? Over sickness, over the physical issues of life. And then even connected with that, and again, I think Zach brought this up in the video, was the uncleanness component, right? A leper would have been unclean. The woman with bleeding would have been unclean. The dead girl would have been unclean. And yet what does Jesus cause to happen in all of those situations? He cleans them, right? The person who had leprosy is no longer with leprosy. The person who is bleeding is no longer bleeding. The person who was dead is no longer dead. All of these things that would have made him unclean, made anybody unclean, they're gone, right? That's been wiped away because of the power of Jesus. And so you have Jesus in those areas as well. And then you've got Jesus with the authority over nature. As we see with calming the storm, you've got Jesus with the authority over sin. As he forgives the sins of the paralyzed man, which hacked a bunch of people off, but he did that as well. And then even over death itself. Right? All of these things, this huge scope that Jesus is saying, I have authority over every single one of these things. Rudy?
Another thing is that, like you were saying, he mentions your sins have been forgiven because of your faith.
Right.
So, yeah.
And again, when you look at the response, if you want to go over there to chapter 9, Jesus says in verse 2 there, when Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven." And behold, some of the scribes said to themselves, "This man is blaspheming." All right, people might claim to drive out demons. They might claim to do miracles, but you don't claim to forgive sins, because that's an absolute no-no. I mean, that's going to get you in trouble immediately. And yet Jesus does this. Now, when you take all of these things, right, all of these different areas where Jesus demonstrates authority, ultimately, what's the conclusion that his readers should reach by the end of chapter 9? This is not just any old person, right? He is, as we would describe him, as God in the flesh. He is the Son of God. He's the Christ, the Messiah. All of the things that we understand. But for them, if you read this, you're saying, okay, here's one thing, and here's another thing, and here's another thing. And he's doing all of these things that ultimately, who have we really only seen do these things before in Scripture? God. God is the one who has power over nature. And if anybody else does it, it's only through the power of God, right? And so you have all of these things adding up to the point that Jesus is in an authority position because he is connected with God. Look at a couple of verses that associate with this. Chapter 9 and verse 8. After he does the forgiving of sins and healing the paralyzed man, it says, "Then when the crowd saw it, they were afraid, and they glorified God who had given such authority to men." I mean, they're recognizing this is a big deal. And then later on in verse 33 of chapter 9, it says, "And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds marveled, saying, 'Never was anything like this seen in Israel.'" Now, were there other people who claimed to be the Messiah? Yeah. And we see that. They even talk about that. But what's going on right now has not ever been seen. They've never seen this. And as to Mike's point earlier, it's not just one thing that they've never seen. I mean, they've never heard someone teach like this. They've never seen someone do this. They've never seen someone do that. And all of these things are simply reinforcing who Jesus is. Dave? Yeah, and that's actually, you went right to where I was going. So go to chapter 8, and let's read. We're going to read one section of this because I think it relates so well to what Dave is talking about. We'll start in verse 5. It says, "When he entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, 'Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly.' And he said to him, 'I will come and heal him.' But the centurion replied, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me, and I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. Now, to what Dave just talked about, this is a demonstration of that attitude, right? Because the centurion recognizes Jesus as an authority, right? Jesus has authority, and so that leads to a measure of what? Of trust. That I trust that you are capable of healing someone that you're not even looking at, that you've not seen them. But I trust that you have authority over disease. You can do this, right? Now, how did he get to that point? How did the centurion get to the point of being able to trust that way? He comes to Jesus because he knows Jesus is capable. And he says, I'm a guy who knows how authority works, right? I have an authority that I answer to, and I've got people that answer to me. And you know what? And he must have run a tight ship is what it sounds like, right? I say go, and they go. And I say come, and they come. I say get it done, and it gets done. And so he's saying, I understand how authority works. When you have authority, you say it, and it happens. And he says, and Jesus, you have authority. And so when you say it, it'll happen. And Jesus is, he says, I've not seen this in anybody else. Because what do we so often see with other people in the Gospels related to Jesus' authority?
Well, they doubt. But think of it also. Here's a guy that actually amazed Jesus, who's the creator and sovereign Lord of the world and the universe, to amaze God.
Right. This is unheard of almost, right? And no one else has been doing this. So often we see the doubt, right? I mean, in the very same section, chapter 9, you've got a synagogue ruler who, he doesn't say, my daughter is dying or dead at home, but I know you can raise her right now if you'll just say it. He says, no, you got to come to my house. But this centurion said, you don't have to come to my house. I know how this works. You say it, and it'll happen. And so for some, they doubted. Others totally rejected the authority of Jesus. But this centurion is an example of when you understand what God has authority over, then you trust him. And what Dave's point was earlier, whether it's politics or health or jobs or whatever, and it's hard, it's really easy to say this. It's really hard to do it, but if we believe that God is the authority, then that's supposed to comfort us. That's supposed to be something that we lean on and say, okay, God is over all. God can handle this. God can deal with this. God can do this. And that's where that guy was. And he's a tremendous example to us of great faith. Anything else jump out to you guys from those first couple of chapters 8 and 9? Got a couple of other things, but didn't know if anybody wanted to jump in with something in particular. I want to highlight just a few things. One of them is in chapter 8, verse 3. You have where Jesus touches the leper, and I'm sure you've seen this before, talked about this before, but it's one of those very. He didn't have to record that for us. He could have just said, "And Jesus healed this leper," but he specifically recorded that Jesus touched him, which again was a big deal because you didn't touch a leper, and we don't know how long this man had leprosy. We don't know his life story, but if he'd had it for any amount of time, barring an accidental touch, nobody's touched this guy. Nobody's connected with him in that way, and we've had a small inkling of what it would be like to go without touching people this last year, where you just don't have contact the same way as normal. You can imagine the weight of that. And when Jesus heals him, he goes out of his way to touch him, which I think demonstrates some of the heart of our God. Mike?
Also, two different things. One of them is the certainty of the healing. Because if he wasn't certain I could heal that person, then there's a fear, I might catch leprosy. But Jesus had no
Right.
doubt whatsoever about the ability to heal.
Right.
But also, earlier we mentioned cleanliness and people who are supposed to be set apart. I mean, he is holy God. Holy should be set apart. And he's chosen to come to this earth surrounded by sin. And other people look at, well, how could you touch that person?
Right.
It's kind of like worrying about a little smudge of dust when you're standing in a mud pit.
Right.
You've already come down into this world of sin and isn't going to quibble about this person might be dirtier than that person.
Yeah, when you think about that example, that's a great thought of mean, this is really a small illustration of what God has done in sending Jesus to earth. He's coming into the mess, the uncleanness of the world. In the same way, he came into that situation and he touched the man. He healed him. And that's what God sent Jesus to do for us, is to come into the mess of an unclean world due to sin and to start making it right and to start fixing some of those things that had been broken because of sin. And so it's a great illustration or a small example of what Jesus came to do at large. Rudy?
What I always have in mind is the hope. I know, like we are now, our ancestors were also hoping for their salvation. They were waiting. And if we notice that it says a big multitude of people, I'm sure it wasn't 3 or 5 that he was
Right.
healing.
Right.
He was healing a multitudes.
Right.
So the point is on that is that they were waiting on something, and that finally, when Jesus came, got realized.
Right.
And that just gives us hope that what we are hoping on is not in vain. It's something that we expect, which is salvation.
Yeah, for God's people, right? For the people that had lived under the old covenant, they're waiting for this Christ, this Messiah to come. And when he gets there, right, there's excitement. Now, again, things don't work as they anticipate, but there's excitement there because God kept his word. God had brought the very one that he had promised. And for us as well, that remains true. God is going to keep his word. God is going to do what he said he would do. And so we wait expectantly for Jesus' return because God keeps his word. Let's look at a couple of other things real quick in chapter 8. So go to verses 18 through 22. So Jesus is in the midst of, he's called several disciples already. He'll call Matthew in chapter 9. We don't really see the specifics in Matthew of any other disciples really being called other than those 5. But he's in the midst of apparently drawing people to himself. And so then in verse 18 we get this. Now when Jesus saw a crowd around him, he gave orders to go over to the other side. And a scribe came up and said to him, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." And Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." Another of the disciples said to him, "Lord, let me first go and bury my father." And Jesus said to him, "Follow me and leave the dead to bury their own." Now, and I've talked about this before, but when you think about, trying to gather a following, you're wanting to get people to understand what's going on and follow you, you don't say stuff like this. You don't tell people it's going to be really challenging. No, you've got to not do that thing that's important to do. You've got to follow me instead. What is Jesus doing here? Why is Jesus telling these people, if you following me is not going to lead to a luxurious lifestyle. You're not going to have everything that you want. I have no place to lay my head. I'm wandering. I'm moving around. Or you've got to sacrifice this thing that you think is really important to come after me. What is Jesus doing? Why is he saying this?
To make sure that they're following from their heart.
And this is you got to know what you're doing. I mean, you're getting into this, right? And he lets them know for sure this is what you're getting into. The challenging nature of this. Dave?
I'm wondering if there's almost that happening within the church around the world because of COVID, that we've got to really, it's very difficult to be lukewarm. And if you're lukewarm, you kind of fade away. And so maybe God is challenging the world in our Christian communities to rise up and to be serious about this call.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing. He doesn't make it mild. It's not halfway. It's significant. And again, you see when we see the disciples that we have record of, right? He says, "Come and follow me." And what do? They drop everything and they follow him. Now, again, that's a little different than our situation, but the point is the level of commitment, right, is what is expected. It's a significant one. We don't actually see the response here, right? We get recorded what Jesus said. We don't see what these people said back to Jesus. The assumption, I think, is that they didn't follow him. But he lays out, this is a strong, tall order that I'm asking you to do. Zach?
How do you think this applies to somebody, they want to follow Jesus, they want to be baptized, they say, "Hey, this sounds good." How does this look to people? How should we say it to people?
Yeah, this is one of the great challenges of trying to reach people, is we oftentimes want to make the appeal as light and carefree as possible so that you want it, right? Because that's what, you sign up for things that sound really good. There's nobody walking around saying, do you want to sign up for a life of suffering and pain? And nobody lines up for that. And so what we do say, hey, do you want all of the blessings? Do you want forgiveness? And which is true, right? But it's only half the story. And so when Jesus lays out the truth here for these people to follow, he lays it out. And I think that's part of our responsibility is to also lay out, here's the reality of what's expected. And we see other places, I believe we were studying Luke 14 on Monday night in our Zoom Bible study, and that's a section where he talks about counting the cost. But there's an aspect of that goes into, are you going to follow? There's a cost involved. Does that kind of go with what you were talking about, Zach? Dave and then Rudy?
I don't remember if it's in Amazon or was it in Africa. I remember years back it was, when a person wants to become a Christian and they want to get baptized, they have to take him to the chief. And the chief said, hey, this is adult stuff. He really challenged them before they became a Christian. Are you sure you're willing to hang in there, tough enough? And we don't do that too much.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I mean, understandably so, we want people to follow Christ. But it's easy to then leave off what actually following Jesus looks like and make it sound a lot simpler or easier than it is. Rudy?
And throughout the scriptures, we realize that God has said that, if you love your brother and your sister more than me, then you are not my true followers.
Right.
And if you love your mother and father more than me, then you are not equipped to be a disciple of mine.
Right.
And what this is saying is that the people are saying, hey, let me go bury, so that means they don't prioritize God first. And also the other one that said, let me bury the dead.
Right.
That's saying, hey, I care about that more, even if I care about God, but I want to do that first. So you're not putting God first, you're actually putting God second.
Yeah, and that's it's tough to work through in your mind, right? You think, well, why wouldn't Jesus let him go and do that? And there's speculation on what all might be going on there, but ultimately, as we'll see with the point that Rudy brought up from chapter 10, he lays out, you gotta. I'm above and beyond everything else. That if you're going to, you can love your family, but not to the level that you love me. That's the consistent message that we see. Terry?
I feel like, no matter what you tell somebody when they become a Christian, I don't think they're really going to fully understand it because they're in Christian faith.
Right.
But as long as we keep studying with them and, don't just baptize them.
Right. And that's the key, right? Is when people become followers of Jesus, we continue to help them walk as followers of Jesus. We disciple them. As we see in Scripture, right? And so it's not just becoming, but it's being is what God is looking for, right? Not those who became disciples, but those who are disciples. And so we see there's a hard calling here, but again, we still try to draw people to Christ, just recognizing, yes, it's going to be challenging, but we're going to walk with you every step of the way. We're going to work with you. I want to go to chapter 9 and verses 9 through 13. We'll move into chapter 10 in just a minute, but I wanted to talk about what happens here in verses 9 to 13. As Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me," and he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice, for I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." Now, you think about what Jesus is doing here, and obviously, he's not doing what's normal, right? Jesus was a rabbi. He was a teacher. He was one that people came to with questions, and the religious leaders, obviously, though they didn't agree with Jesus, right? They still at times, whether or not, I guess with a pure heart, would call him teacher. And these teachers, there was kind of a way that you probably did things, right? You didn't associate with certain groups of people. That brought you into a place of being in contact with, the quote-unquote sinners. You didn't associate with those, and we understand from reading Scripture that, Today, we would even say it a little bit, still works the same way of, if you're eating with someone, there's a level of an association, maybe a friendship, because you're eating together. Not as much today, but it was definitely, we believe, the case back then. So I want to ask, what exactly is going on in this situation? What is Jesus telling these individuals about what his ministry is about? Ree?
About his mercy and how is he able to come for the needy, not for the unneedy.
Yeah, there's that word, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. I don't remember what the translation was that I was looking at. I think it said something, maybe like compassion, some other word for mercy, but he's caring for those, right, that are in need. That's what he came to do. Those who are, as he says here, sick, are in need of a doctor. What else do we see here? How does this text sometimes get used maybe not quite as it's intended? What can happen with this? What have you maybe heard before from someone? Rudy?
That we can go on and hang around with all the sinners.
Okay. We can go and be with people because Jesus hung out with all kinds of people. And there is truth to that. Jesus did, and we can as well. But what I was thinking about in preparing for this was, notice what Jesus says here. When they ask him, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? And notice what Jesus says. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. What does he say about these people that he's spending time with? They're sick. That's the reason. He cares about them, but it's not just, well, you can be wherever with whoever for any reason, whatever's going on. But he says, no, I am specifically with these people because they're sick and they need what I and I alone can provide. Mike?
Unless all these people lived in Matthew's house, these people went to Jesus. Jesus did it to them or their place of sin.
Right, he wasn't in the middle of it. And we don't know what all is going on in all of these situations, but we know Jesus and the character of Jesus. And he's going to places where there are people who are in sin, but he's going because they need to get out of sin, not to remain in it any longer.
One thing that I've always had a hard time picturing this going down, the Pharisees were like, well, why do you hang out with these people? To say that, all the Pharisees have to be the exact same.
Right.
They're associating with them the same way Jesus is.
Right, there's somewhere nearby, and I read, because there's one of the, I don't remember what chapter it's in, where Jesus is with a guy named Simon, and there's a woman there, and it's like, what is happening? Are there people moving in and out of this? It sounds very odd for us. We kind of have, the door opens, the door closes, who's in the house is in the house, but it kind of sounds like maybe there was just more openness with when they were eating, that people might have gone through or around or something, but yeah, it's kind of like, well, if he's eating with these people, unless you're like standing outside the door looking in, what exactly is going on here? But I think, when we think about what Jesus' ministry was about, it was not about Jesus wanting to be with sinful humanity. It was about Jesus bringing healing to sinful humanity. And though we don't bring forgiveness per se through us or with our own selves, we bring Christ who is able to provide that. And that's what the world needs. The world doesn't need us to just have compassion on it, though it needs that, but a desire to help it out of the mess of sin that it's in, and that's only found in Jesus. Rudy?
Also, in this instance, he shows the authority that Jesus has because he knows what people are thinking in their hearts, and he knows that they're going to criticize him. But he shows the authority he has that he has come to do what he needs to do. And it doesn't matter if anybody criticizes anything, or even if the scribes or the Pharisees are always talking bad about him. He already knows all of that, but it just shows how, he came to do what he came to do. He's got his authority.
Yeah, he's not asking for permission here. He's not apologizing for what he's doing. He says, no, this is what I came to do. Betty?
I'm just wondering why they asked the disciples, and Jesus is sitting right there. Are they the translators, or?
They're probably a lot like us, where if I don't like what Rudy's doing, I'm going to ask you to ask Rudy. That's maybe they're just as bad about that as we are. Like,
I think Jesus shows some real wisdom here because they said, why is he eating with sinners? Jesus could have turned around and said, okay, friend, I'm going to do that.
right,
He could have laid them real low.
right.
But he didn't. He showed
right, I'm fixing this problem. One of the things that Jesus does, and he does it subtly, and they don't always realize it. Every once in a while they do, is it seems like, oh, you guys are okay, but they're not okay. They think, when they would have heard this, they thought, well, okay, yeah, we're the righteous, and that's what they considered themselves. But the way he went about this is he was directing it to the issue that was at hand. This is why I'm doing this. You ask me, here is why I am doing this. But what eventually they're supposed to see, and this is what he lays out in other places, is you are also in just as much need of me as these people are. They just didn't see it. And so Jesus his ministry is one that he is bringing people out of sin, and those that recognized that they needed that, he was right there. He was right there. For those that didn't, it was a much harder situation. I'll mention one more thing, and then we'll go into chapter 10. One of the more interesting parts is verses 28 through 34 of chapter 8, and maybe you've studied this and maybe you have a good answer, but this is the section where Jesus casts out the demons from these two guys, and they talk to Jesus, and they have a brief conversation, and they end up rushing into these pigs, and the pigs end up running down this hill and all drowning. And you read that, and it's like, what just happened? Why would Jesus do that? And we really don't know as far as, the text doesn't tell us. It doesn't say, and this is why Jesus did that, or whose the pigs were. There's all kinds of thoughts around this situation of why would Jesus do this? Why would Jesus allow that? I don't have a great answer as to the why there. I did think, just my own opinion, thought about if I was just thinking about that, there would be no doubt that something had just happened. That these guys who were demon-possessed and couldn't be chained, couldn't be controlled, are all of a sudden sitting there in their right mind, and those pigs just took off and they're all drowned. It's clearly something, this is not just and they want Jesus out because they're terrified of what has just happened. But it's significant, right? Jesus, it's abundantly clear something has happened. And so whether Jesus allowed it to show that, look what's just been done, we don't know. It's a very odd situation to read about. So with that being said, let's go over to chapter 10. We'll end in chapter 10. We won't really get into chapter 11 tonight. But chapter 10 is what some will call the limited commission. We think about the Great Commission is going to all over the world. Here, Jesus is telling his 12 disciples to go into basically the Jewish area. They're not going to go to the Gentiles. They're not going to go to the Samaritans. They're going to go to the Jewish people. And so when you think about this, after he calls them in the first few verses there, from verse 5 all the way through the end of the chapter, we have Jesus basically telling them, here's what's going to happen. Here's what I'm expecting of you. Here's what you need to do. What jumps out to you about this? When you read through chapter 10, what do we see here about whether it was what Jesus was calling the disciples to do, maybe what we are called to do? Anything from this chapter that kind of sparked you in any way, Rudy?
One thing that got me was that accommodated them to be vigilant and careful about what they're going to do and how they're going to do it.
Yeah. He asks them to be wise as they go about this. He prepares them for what they're going to face. And obviously there are portions of this that I believe, they're not really applicable to our situation specifically. We can take some application from them, but he's sending them out into a specific situation, right? Here's what I'm sending you into, what I'm asking you to do. And it was not going to be easy. And some of this is not going to be played out for a while yet. It's not immediate. It's going to be later on as they get further on in their ministry. But he lays out, here's what you're going to face. Any other thoughts from chapter 10 on what we see here, Gary?
Well, I thought it was interesting. I think this is the first time I've read where they're told to cast out demons and heal people and raise the dead and all that. I can't imagine standing there and listening to that and going, what? Me?
Right. Yeah, this is when you think about, Jesus is basically saying, I'm going to send you out as miniature versions of myself. I mean, you're going to be me out there, and you're going to do the same things that I've been doing. You're going to be preaching. You're going to be doing miracles. You're going to be doing my work. And yeah, we don't know how long they'd been following Jesus at this point. But I mean, even if it was the full 3 years, it'd be like, well, that's a lot. That's a big deal. what he's asking them to do and what they're ultimately going to do. Mike?
See it as a fulfillment of the promises to Abraham about his seed being blessed. And obviously Jesus didn't come to earth just to bless the Hebrew nation, but he did give them first shot at it, and he was true to Abraham.
Yeah, they are given the opportunity to listen first and foremost. He spreads the message out to them. I want to read, let's just read starting in verse 16. He says, "Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to courts and flog you in their synagogues, and you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. Brother will betray brother, or brother will deliver brother over to death, and the father his child, and children will rise against their parents and have them put to death. And you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. When they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes." What's Jesus just done here? I mean, when Jesus speaks this to the disciples, what's just happened? I mean, imagine you're one of the 12 and you hear this. I mean, what is Jesus just
It's scary.
It's a little scary, right? He has dropped a pretty good-sized bomb on, this is what's going to happen, and you're going to be arrested. You're going to be put on trial. You're going to be before governors. You're going to be in the midst of a challenging situation where families are being torn apart because of the message of the gospel. And so, not something that you would immediately say, this sounds exciting. I would be like, this sounds terrifying. This is scary because he's not sugarcoating it, right? In the same way we saw earlier with, if you're going to follow me, here's the expectation. Well, he's telling these guys, listen, if you're going to go out and you're going to do this, here's what you're going to run into. You're going to run into opposition. You're going to run into challenges. You're going to run into people who do not want to hear what you have to say. Now, why would he do that? Why would Jesus tell them that?
So they aren't surprised.
So you're not shocked. Because what happens? I mean, what happens when your expectation is not reality? What would have happened had the disciples gone out and they immediately get met with opposition from the Pharisees or from other religious leaders?
I got discouraged and quit.
Yeah, I can't do this. Or maybe I'm doing something wrong. Or Jesus didn't, this is not what's supposed to happen. Right? I was supposed to go out and everybody's supposed to be excited about this message. Notice what Jesus says in verse 24. "A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher, and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebul, how much more will they malign those of his household? In essence, if they have called me a worker of Satan, well, connect the dots there. You're going to be in the same boat." Zach?
One thing that is easy to miss here in the gospel is that you read the New Testament, clearly there's persecution. You see that. Like, I remember totally understanding that. Before anybody sat down and talked to me, like, okay, you have to confess, you can't try to save your life, and you might be persecuted. But the thing I didn't grasp for a decade maybe was that most of Jesus' persecution came from the people of God. Just finally at the end, like his death is the stamp of approval from Pilate, But then Paul is going around preaching, when they're preaching, most of the times it comes from people who are acting in the name of God. They think they are. I didn't recognize that. And that's something that people should realize. It's going to be religious people. But sometimes those are the folks that are the most upset that they're speaking truth.
Yeah, it's not. It simplifies matters to think, well, it's just the world that doesn't approve of what God's people are doing. But sometimes it's those who think they're doing what God wants done or speaking as God wants spoken, and they're not. But that's and to Zach's point, I mean, Acts is filled with, if not more, at least an equal amount, right, from the people of God, if you will, the Jewish people, against the ministry of Jesus, as much as the Gentiles were against it. Mike?
Yeah, I was going to bring up Acts 4, where Peter and John are brought before the council. Why are you preaching at this temple? We told you guys to
Right.
And, we can only speculate. Do you think they were thinking back to this time and thinking, okay, no, this is the plan?
Right.
And that confidence, God's still using this opportunity. And then I can't remember, is it Acts 6 or 7 where it talks about a lot of the priests converted over?
Right.
How many of them were convinced on that day? So even when it looks like, oh, this is a total disaster,
Right.
because Jesus gave this warning, they could go into it with the confidence, this is part of the plan, this is okay.
Right. And this is what God knew was going to happen. He laid it out for us in advance. He told us, you're going to face opposition. In fact, you're going to be called before the leaders. You're going to be called before people of authority. Don't worry about it. I'm with you. You'll be given the words that you need. And so he's building up this level of confidence, not in themselves, but in who he is. Look at the next few verses here, verse 28 or verse 26. So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. And if you stop right there, it's like, well, that's ominous, right? That's a very ominous sounding section of don't be afraid of those who can kill you. Be afraid of the one who can basically destroy you, body and soul. But we have to keep reading. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father. But even the hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore, you are of more value than many sparrows. So in essence, what is Jesus in this section trying to help them understand? Because he's just said, listen, here is all this awful stuff that's going to happen to you. Now what's he say?
Don't worry, it'll be okay.
Don't worry. Trust me, right? And he does it in 2 ways, right? The first way he says is, listen, they can't do the worst thing to you. Now, they can kill you, yes, but they can't harm your soul. Only God is capable of doing that. That's why you fear God. And so he, on the one hand, he says, okay, they're not worth being afraid of. But he follows it up by not then going into a long section on why God is so terrifying. But he goes into a section on why God cares for us and how he cares for us. As just as he sees the sparrows, just as he can count the hairs on our head, he cares for us. And so he's doing 2 different things here, right? He's encouraging them not to give in to fear, while also giving them a reason to not be afraid. God's concern for them. And so they're going into this, and this is where Jesus does so well what we struggle with. He's real with them about what they're going to face, but he's not just real about the challenges, but he's real about the blessing, that God is going to be with them. He's going to help them through this, that he cares for them. Rudy and then Mike.
That's what makes me real happy also, being in the ministry of understanding God, because basically what he's saying is we're huge. We might be just a single Rudy here, but on the eyes of God, I mean, being bigger than than a bird or whatever.
Right.
I'm being loved more than all the creation of the birds and the trees that God has made. I mean, that's huge. In my heart, that's huge.
Yeah, God cares for us. If he knows the birds, right? He knows us in a far greater way. Mike?
Also tucked in here is a refutation against what you might call the regular Christians, the people who only believe what Jesus says and will say discount whatever Paul says.
Sure.
The epistles, because he says, have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden, which will not be known. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and so on. He said, there's going to be a greater revelation after my time here. What God, what I want all of you to know is not limited to just what what's being said now, but more will be revealed later.
Yeah, the truth is going to come out. The reality of things is going to be made known. And the opposition is going to be shown for what it is, which is not God's way. And the truth, right, will be revealed as well. Let's mention one more thing. I want to mention Brianna had sent in that with the disciples fleeing from persecution because he wanted them to reach as many people as possible and not just give in to persecution. And that, I think, is a valid thought with they shake the dust off their feet, they keep moving. If you meet opposition, keep going because there is more work to do. I want to end with the last section here. It's a tough one. We'll start in verse 32. It says, so everyone who acknowledges me before men, I also will acknowledge before my Father who is in heaven. But whoever denies me before men, I also will deny before my Father who is in heaven. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. You won't find a lot of stronger words than these as far as what it means to follow Jesus. And so, in those first couple of verses that we looked at, he makes clear, you can acknowledge me or you can deny me. And there's a consequence either way. You acknowledge me and you'll be acknowledged. You deny me and you'll be denied as well. And so, in some settings, in this setting, it's really easy. In other settings, it's more challenging. But he says, if you are mine, then say it. And if you're not, well, then that'll be made known as well. And so there's there's no middle ground with what Jesus is saying here. And then he says, I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. And when you read through, and we're in our 1 John study that we're going through on Sundays, the Bible and God uses very strong language, right? And he uses language that you could read it and you think, wait a second, what is, that doesn't sound right, but it's when we understand it in the culmination of Scripture. So when he says, I have not come to bring peace but a sword, what's he talking about? And what's he not talking about?
Well, he is the Blessing of Peacemakers, and peace with God, that's all so much part of him. So he's not talking about that kind of peace with God and even with one another, but there is strife and problems that will occur because you will have a conviction about Jesus that others won't, and the world won't like that.
And that's something that it began then, and it continues today. It's shifted a little bit, right? For today, if you have family or friends that maybe don't like that you're a Christian, or maybe you know someone that's in that situation, it's probably because maybe they feel judged, or they may not like some of the stances that we take from Scripture. But for Jesus' day, you think about, well, man, like, turn them over to be killed? That kind of stuff? Well, why would they do that? Well, I mean, when you think about it, what's happening? Well, in one household, you might have someone who believes in Jesus. The other person that's right across the table, what do they think about Jesus? He's a blasphemer, right? He's a false Messiah. That's not agree to disagree kind of stuff in a Jewish household. You don't just say, well, you can believe in a false Messiah, and I'll believe, in waiting for the right one, and we'll just agree to disagree. That doesn't work. I mean, why was there so much strife and contention between Christians and Jews? Because it can't coexist. If Jesus is the Messiah, then he must be followed. And if he is not, he must be absolutely and unequivocally rejected. There's no middle ground there. There's no, well, we'll just get along. And so it makes perfect sense, though it is sad, that families would turn against one another. And if we could see it, I would guess it was pretty routine, normal for people to know, if I do this, if I commit to Jesus, I'm going to be kicked out of my house. I'm going to be my family's going to have nothing to do with me, because in their mind, I'm a blasphemer. I am following someone who is not of God, and so it was a very, very big deal. Rudy?
And in many instances of the Bible, they use the sword quite a few times, and also, what a sword does? It splits.
Yeah.
Cuts ties. So which means if you're gonna believe it or not, if you are, you're just gonna cut ties with whoever is not. So basically, it's splitting it like that. So it's like a sword splitting a whole family.
Yeah.
That's what
Yeah.
the word is.
It is, and it's a deep cut. I mean, it's a big deal, Mike.
And in light of that, the original Greek, the flavor for against, set against each other is at variance. So we read that and we think against, like I'm supposed to be against, my mother, my father, the world. But it's more going to establish a delineation between the two. The difference will exist, but it's more descriptive than, say, a verb in action.
Sure. Yeah, because of what it is about, right? There's going to be this separation that takes place, and that separation is not a peaceful one. It's not one that coexists well. And that's I don't want to sidebar. I'm not going to sidebar. But I always kind of, chuckle's probably not the best word. Like the coexist stickers always make me chuckle, because I just think, man, that doesn't work. All of those symbols on that sticker, they don't coexist. You can't. It doesn't work that way. I want to mention one more thing, and then we'll wrap up. So you look at this, and he says, whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And we see, I believe it's in it's either in Mark or Luke. I think it's Luke, but he basically says, if you don't hate your father or mother, you don't hate. And he's basically saying the same thing here, right? That it's not literally, I don't want you to love any of your family. You need to, hate all of them. But Tier makes it sound like there's going to be there's not a move. It's God over all else, every relationship, and for them, for the situation that they were in of possibly living in a house still with their parents, even as they were older, and caring for them, it's even more important than that relationship that God told you to honor. Even more important than that, and then for a parent to say, even more than the love that you have for your child, even more than that, you must love me. And so again, there's this line drawn, right? There's this sword that's cut through, and it says there's one way that's right, and there's one way that's wrong, and it is a strong calling that he's placing here on those who choose to follow him. And so as we continue to read, we're going to see Jesus continue to have very strong things to say about what it means to be a disciple. And so as we move forward, I think this week is chapters 12 to 17 that we'll be getting into and getting to the halfway point of Matthew. So go ahead, Rudy.
Another thing to keep in mind is that here in America, we're free. We actually love, whatever the people chooses is their own. And, we'll support you. We're fine.
Sure.
We're okay. But if you go to other countries, it is terrible. I mean, the parents can really, scatter their kids away. They don't want to know anything about it once they become Christians.
Yeah, there are some, again, we have significant freedoms here. There are challenges, but there's a lot of places where it is a big deal. For us, for a lot of people, you can follow Christ, and it's not going to necessarily impact all of those relationships, but in some places it really would. And so it's part of the strong calling that God makes for his people. With all of that being said, we'll go ahead and wrap up with our online stuff. Appreciate everybody joining us tonight, and we will move into our